Amidst the projections of a sharp decline during pandemic, Indonesia's logistic industry faces challenges and opportunities in the same time. So before going further, let's examine how the actual conditions of Indonesia's logistic industry through the following graphic. Here it is. Through the first graphic, we can see logistic industry overview amidst the pandemic. So we have two indicators in here. First, the export and import that is heavily contracted, and then domestic forwarding that has a good performance. Let's see. Export-import consisted of industries, raw materials, fashions, and also electronics. While in the other side, for domestic forwarding, it has pharmaceutical, healthcare, and fast-moving consumer goods, and also e-commerce related. And we gather this source from Indonesia's logistic associations. And logistic players are looking for ways to maintain business amidst the coronavirus pandemic. And the reason is that although logistic distributions is not prohibited, temporary closures of trade and industry has delivered many impacts. Indonesia's logistic association stated that the decline in logistic business could reach 50 up to 80%. And logistic services related to import and export almost fully stopped because by cessations of the productions and factory activities. Meanwhile, some business sectors is known as logistic industry supporter. The business even increased during the pandemic, such as the e-commerce, fast-moving consumer goods, and also food and beverages. So how much actually the volume of freight during the first 2 months of the pandemic? The information is on the next graphic. Here it is. We can see the domestic freight volume that we gathered the data from March 2020 and April 2020, exactly 2 months after the pandemic. So we got two indicators in here, train and ship. First of all, we can see in March 2020, the train is in 4.55 million tons, while in the April, it went down to be 4.23 million tons only. And meanwhile, for the second indicators, which is ships, for 25.49 million tons in March 2020, and meanwhile, in April 2020, the number went down to be 24.91 million tons only, and we gathered the data quite valid from the Indonesia Central Statistic Agency, or a BPS. And despite the decline from various months, quite positive data can be seen when we compare to the same period in the previous year. In April 2020, the Central Statistic Agency noted that the number of goods carried by train grew by 9.46%. And the Statistic Agency claims that this is in line with President Joko Widodo's mandate, which emphasized that the transportations of goods and logistics must still be maintained for the needs of the people, even in the midst of large-scale social restrictions policy. Meanwhile, the Central Statistic Agency recorded the growth of the logistics sectors in the first quarter of 2020 at 1.27% year-on-year. And with that figure, the logistics sector contributed to GDP in the first quarter of 2020 as much as 5.17%. As the logistic industry is closely related to the online business, the data shows that there was an increase in online transactions amid the pandemic. To know more about it, let's see it through the next graphic, shall we? Here it is. We can see the surging of online transactions amid COVID-19 pandemics. First of all, it goes really well in the staple food needs, as the demand increased by 350% by online transactions. And moving on to food and beverages, online transactions for this sector recorded increase of 200%. Very fantastic. And related to healthcare, the online transactions for this sector has surged up into 90%. And outdoor and indoor hobbies went up 70% for the online transactions, and these data is happening amidst the COVID-19 pandemics, as we gather it through the Ministry of Cooperatives and SMEs data. And the soaring trend of online shopping through e-commerce platforms recognized by one of the biggest marketplace, Bukalapak. In the March 2020, when the first case of COVID-19 was found in Indonesia, Bukalapak recorded an increase in transactions up to 20% from the previous month. These situations, of course, affected the supporting business such as forwarding or shipping, which is known as the part of logistic business. One of the company in shipping business, G&T, confirms that the increase in the volume of goods delivery, especially amid the large-scale social restrictions implementations in several areas. The increase in volume hit 15% compared to the normal conditions or before COVID-19 pandemic. As the transactions and shipments during the pandemic increased, the Minister of Cooperatives and Small and Medium Enterprises, Teten Mastuki, even asked the cooperative and SMEs can utilize e-commerce to drive product sales. In the midst of challenges and opportunities, where's the positions of Indonesia's logistic industry among other countries? So let's see it in the next graphic as we may get curious about this. So here it is, we can see the list of Asian countries, and we try to elaborate that Indonesia has a big logistic cost when it turns out to GDP. Indonesia's logistic costs contribute 24% to the GDP, and the number is the largest among of the Asian countries, whereas Vietnam is only contributed by 20% to the GDP, and while we can see the best example goes to Japan by only contributing 8% to the GDP, following by Singapore by only contributed by 8% to its GDP, and South Korea by only 9%. And we gather the data from the Frost and Sullivan and also our research team. And since one of the problem is the high cost in logistics in Indonesia, the observers say that the connectivity development needs to be encouraged to improve the competitiveness of Indonesia's logistic industry. According to the Frost and Sullivan, Indonesia has the most expensive logistic costs in Asia. 24% of the gross domestic product for a drive from Singapore and Japan, with logistic costs only 8% of the GDP. Based on the facts, the high cost of logistics mainly occurs in eastern Indonesia. This is due to uneven infrastructure development in some regions. Even so, the government's effort to build infrastructures over the past years has helped to reduce the inequality in these areas. And furthermore, the high cost of logistics is closely related to the competitiveness of the Indonesia's logistic industry. So, how is the competitiveness of Indonesia's logistic industry compared to other Asian countries? The information's on the next graphic. So let's see it through the next graphic. Here it is, we can see Asian Logistic Competitiveness Index. The best goes with Singapore by 4. And then Thailand by 3.41 index point, while Vietnam, our neighbor country, by 3.27 index point, and Malaysia, our neighbor country, by 3.22 index point, while we can see Indonesia, these positions far below Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia, and the index point of 3.15 index point. But below us, there is a Philippines by 2.9 index point, and Brunei, and Laos, and Cambodia, and also Myanmar. And based on the World Bank data, Indonesia's logistical performance index is on the level of 3.15 on the scale of 1 to 5. Indonesia's logistic competitiveness index is below Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and also Malaysia. Meanwhile, to the encourage of the competitiveness of the national logistic industry, various methods have been carried out by the government. One of them through the Presidential Instructions number 5 of 2020 concerning the arrangement of the national logistic ecosystem. These presidential instructions aim to improve the performance of the national logistic industry, improve the investment climate, and also improve the competitiveness of the national economy. Some of the main things are the simplifications of government service business process and the logistic based on technology informations, and also collaborations of international and domestic logistics service systems between logistical operators in the public and also private sectors. And then, yes, viewers, a lot of homework needs to be done to improve the Indonesian's logistic industry. We hope all efforts of the government and stakeholders will bring more positive results for Indonesia's logistic industry. And stay tuned to market headlines, because we will be right back after the quiz break.